Right, we're set. So hello everyone who's joining. I assume people will start join later on. This is one of the first talks. I want to introduce you to three very special guests for us. We're thrilled to have you here. We know in Don's case that there's a huge difference with us. He's in Philippines, so we appreciate the effort you guys are doing to be with us. But I want to introduce you to Don, Erica, and Gustavo. The three of them are participating in very interesting civic technologies projects. Those are fascinating initiatives that they're going to share with us. And we're thrilled to have you here. We think that you can add things from great value to the NGOs in Latin America. So we really appreciate taking your time to take part of this festival. I'm going to share my screen with you. Please let me know if you're able to see it. Yeah, cool. So we're going to, this is going to be a fairly general conversation. I will be the moderator of this talk, but first of all, before making some questions, some general questions to try for you guys to share your experience with us, we might start by asking you to explain to us what is it that you do, what is it the great job that you're doing. So why don't we start by Check My School from Don. Don, would you like to share with us what is it that you do?
Well, our organization is called ANSA, East Asia Pacific. That's Affiliated Network for Social Accountability in East Asia and Pacific, and we are based in the Philippines. It is actually an advocacy organization advancing governments or citizen engagement with government and citizens monitoring of government performance. And for this particular session, I'm going to be sharing our engagement in the education sector. We are present in different sectors, but in the education sector, we have the initiative called Check My School. And Check My School is participatory. It's a participatory monitoring in the education sector. We basically promote access to information on education and school services, and we facilitate feedback of community members, school community members, on the quality of school services that are provided by the government. And we process, analyze those feedback through Civic Tech. So we have a Check My School app for that, and we also have a map, a neediness index map, as you can see in the screen. This is the school neediness index map that we have developed in the Philippines. I can explain probably later what this contains, what this map contains, and what the map and the app actually do. So I'll go there later. We are actually not a civic or a tech organization. We get support from interns sometimes and other external service providers. And that's both, I don't know, that's both an opportunity and a challenge for us. An opportunity to work with, tech organization, and a challenge because, that makes us more vulnerable to dependence on, tech groups for us to really maximize and optimize tech in our work. Let me stop there so that, we can hear the others too.
Awesome. Erica, she's working on MapKibera in Nairobi. Would you mind explaining to us briefly what is it that you do?
Sure. Yeah. You can hear me, right? Is it? Okay. So this is a slum called Kibera in Nairobi from satellite image. And MapKibera, my partner and I started in 2009 as an initiative to use Openstreetmap, which some of you probably know, to allow residents to create their own map of their community. And we've since worked in a lot of different parts of the country of Kenya and in several different slum areas of Nairobi to also train people in mapping. You can go to the next slide. So this is back in 2009. We worked with several youth from the community using handheld GPS devices and paper. We've since moved to use mostly Android phones to collect map data. Although GPS still works really well too, but and then creating a map, something like this one on Openstreetmap. This just indicates, well, they've been working hard on it for a decade, so it's quite complex and detailed if you zoom in on Openstreetmap, but collecting things like water points, shops, health clinics, all the NGO offices that might be there. Churches obviously show up pretty well there. So this is just kind of the default view on Openstreetmap. And using this for social purposes. So a lot of our goal is to empower citizens to use data and maps and also media to achieve different goals that they might have for their community. So this is also, we have a YouTube channel and a video team that covers the slum because it's kind of lacking in coverage by mainstream media, or at least representative coverage of how people are experiencing things locally. We can move to the next slide.
Yeah.
Oh, oops. And then Open Schools Kenya, just as one example, we did a lot of work mapping all the schools in a few different informal settlements in Nairobi, and that includes hundreds of informal or small sort of schools, which I guess the other NGO that's speaking right now will know a lot about, the Totos. So we've mapped them and also collected a lot of data on each of them. So the point of this is to kind of share we worked with the school leaders, and it's to kind of support their own advocacy for themselves, because education isn't reaching the poorest students very well, and the resources of the government are not reaching. But people are providing a lot of their own social services, essentially, from within the community. But we've also worked more recently with local government in the rural parts of the country, mapping government-sponsored projects. So there's been quite a few applications for, anyway, I'll get into it more with our next session, or our next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Gust, your turn.
Hello, I'm Gustavo. I will talk about this Totos. I'm not based in Kenya right now. I'm from Argentina, but I'm currently doing a fellowship with Engineering for Change, and we're doing a research collaboration with Huawei in Kenya. So we are making a research about civic technology in the region, most specific in the rural areas. And one of the projects that we're working with is Tiny Totos, which is a social enterprise based in Kenya that is looking to solve the problem of informal daycares in Nairobi. For a little bit of context, right now there are 2.5 million people that live in slums in Kenya, which correspond only to the 6% of the land in the city. And there are no formal daycares or estates that are based in the, so don't have many alternatives to where to leave their children when they go to work. So the first option is to leave their children in informal daycare, which they have a very precarious management of the institutions. So what Tiny Totos is doing is trying to improve the management of these institutions. One of the solutions that they currently have is a phone application that we are currently working on. And those applications allow to make a better management of the institution, make a track about the assistance of the children, track their payments. And in the future, that is the feature that we are looking to improve, is to add health information about children to make a better track about how is the alimentation of the children, the nutrition, and how is the health of the children itself, and that kind of things.
Awesome. Thank you, Gus. We're going to make some general questions now. The intention is for you guys to share with us all of your experience. And I will start by asking you, what has been the biggest challenge you faced on this project? I assume connectivity is one of those. I assume there's many local circumstances that might difficult or might cause difficulties for your projects. So I would like to ask you, which were those challenges and how are you overcoming it? Don, would you like to start? Hello?
Okay, from the two initiatives.
I thought it was mine.
Hello. From the two initiatives that I was able to mention, first the map. The school neediness index map. The school neediness index map is actually a way for us to identify schools that are in need and what kind of needs they have. So that's the map I was referring a while ago. There are various data, and they are data from the government that we index. This is good for over 44,000 schools in the Philippines. But the main challenge there was really, obtaining the data year by year, and access to data could really be difficult. And in that sense, making them publicly accessible is really one big accomplishment already. But there remains the challenge of, updating it and convincing the government again to release, the most updated data. And in the case of the situation right now, the COVID-19 situation, pandemic, data had been really overhauled. Enrollment is already different now, and the map may require another kind of formatting, and that's another challenge for us because, as I said a while ago, we're not exactly in control of the tech part. That's for the map. Now, for the feedback mechanism that we have, where we use the CMS app. And again, if I may explain, the CMS app actually works like a social media where people could post observations on what's going on in the school and what kind of facilities they lack and so on and so forth. The main challenge we encounter there is actually the reaction from government authorities. Because in our culture, of course, maybe it could be cultural, negative observations could be taken personally. And I guess the challenge there is that when it is, when it is in an open platform, when it is an open technology or an app, it is there, and you can. It's difficult to control what's going to be out there, and it's a challenge because it could go against, the initiative or the proponent of the initiative because of certain sensitivity that it may entail. So I guess those two were some of the many challenges actually, because there are also, the tech part technology, but I'm here mentioning now on the more substantive part because we are using this civic tech in the context of governance and public advocacy for better services.
Awesome. Erica, would you like to share with us how is it that you're overcoming the challenges you're facing?
Biggest challenge, I guess, would be definitely not the part where we sort of worked to do trainings and create the map. That had its challenges, but in terms of like the bigger, longer term challenges, we're trying to make sure that the data has social impact along the lines of what community members want it to have. So I think that sort of similarly, even to the Philippines, having, knowing the right channels to make that impact and the right kind of mechanisms within the country. So, I pointed out the schools map just because that's one thing that we've mapped. We've also mapped, water, sanitation, all kinds of things that people might want to impact. Also, where there might be demolitions because it's an informal settlement. But having sort of that policy impact has been a big challenge. So with the schools map, we integrated work a bit with more sort of policy lobbying organizations and tried to form more sort of networks with those who are already advocating for informal schools. And we learned a lot about that process and a lot about what schools are, the different initiatives in government or delays with implementation of different policies and things like that. So it's sort of just a long-term thing. So that's, I guess, why it's a huge challenge. But if you are already working in advocacy, you'll know that kind of process well. It's just if you're a sort of a tech organization, you might not. I mean, even in the other main challenge, I guess, is just the sustaining enough funding to keep pushing that direction, because a lot of times the funding will come in for a quick project, and especially with tech, it will be like a 6 month to a year funding of some kind. Let's just get that map together, and the impact of the map will be left to someone else, or in the project design and in the funding resource kind of sourcing. Like the world of technology is thought to be very fast. But when it comes together with social impact, it's actually no faster. I don't think it's that much faster. It just facilitates different avenues for change, but there's still the same political barriers and institutional barriers and economic barriers. So yeah, it's hard to say one big challenge, because that's kind of wraps up several. but I think we've just learned how to work over the years. And we've learned that like just putting information out there isn't enough. And you really have to be working with those key players and identifying who has influence, and also building networks. Like we kind of tried to work with a lot of teachers, and yeah, it's sort of like campaign building, I guess you could say.
Awesome. And Gust?
Yes, I think one of the biggest challenge in this project, and I'm not talking only about Tiny Totos, but like all the civic technology that are targeted to rural areas, is the mobile connectivity. Like it's not the same when you're building an application for users in urban areas, but when you're building an application for users with low connectivity, because you have to take care about all of those details and make sure that the application is optimized to not use a lot of data, and like that makes more harder the development of the application. And also our target users don't have the best smartphones in the market, so we have to make sure that make a design that will guarantee a nice user experience for those users. And another challenge that we're currently facing is that we want to share the data with the parents of the children, but those parents, most of them don't have access to smartphones. So we are currently looking for a way to share that data. One of the alternatives that we are thinking is to develop another service to share the data via SMS. So those kind of users won't have access to the application, but will have access to the information via SMS.
Awesome. Thank you, Gust. You guys were talking about how important is it not to only consider the technical side, but also like the public policy / advocacy side and its importance on this kind of project. And you were mentioning particularly government, how government becomes a crucial stakeholder on this kind of project, and how there are some particularities and some very local characteristics of government that might make a bit more difficult the development of this kind of projects. But how are you able to sort of build bridges and build connections between all the stakeholders that you have on this project to facilitate your work? Because Don was telling to us how some situations might be difficult in the context of Philippines, same with Erica. How are you dealing with all the stakeholders? Who are your key stakeholders? And how do you manage to overcome that? Don would like to start.
Me again. Okay. Well, we actually entered into a memorandum of agreement with our Department of Education here in the Philippines. And so we were able to secure that. At least we're able to secure that. But it is not an assurance that everything will run smoothly. But at least with that, we were able to at least make sure that we'll be able to convince us offices to allow us to secure certain information that we were requesting. Even with the memorandum of agreement, we still have to request the information. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's not an assurance that everything will run smoothly, but at least the initial base, in a way, has been covered. The other side is different with the civil society, with the communities. That's another kind of legwork that we need to do. And in a way, that's more laborious, because you need to really convince them of the use of the value of the app, for example, that you are introducing. And it's more, building social capital rather than formalizing it through agreements and stuff like that. So that's basically, the different modes of strategy that we've applied in securing the cooperation and support of stakeholders like the government and of course the community.
Awesome, thank you. Erica, would you like to dive in a bit more on this advocacy public policy side you were telling us about?
Sure. I mean, as far as stakeholders, our primary stakeholder is always those communities who are working in, and Kibera has been the top one. I mean, I guess it took us a while, like, even though we were working primarily with residents of Kibera, and I should say, like, the organization is now led by a couple of people that we started working with at that time. So I'm not based in Kenya right now. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I support the organization. But so there's like this kind of local ownership we tried to establish, and then also just making sure the community members were like, I guess the social capital Don mentioned was sort of the first thing. So like that we kind of a trusted organization. It's actually very difficult to achieve that when there's a lot of organizations. Maybe in places where there's fewer organizations, it's not as difficult and people are more open to you. But in Nairobi, there's just hundreds and hundreds of small nonprofits or large nonprofits, and there's a lot of kind of suspicion when you have a new idea, especially, which is warranted suspicion, really. It's like, well, is this really going to do anything for us? A lot of people come and have ideas, and so you really have to sort of spend that trust and work together to not just say, well, this is this idea, but like develop the concepts together. And so there's that part that's really key. And then in terms of the advocacy, we kind of, we started building relationship with, first of all, the Minister of Parliament that was for Kibera, which he was extremely into education, and separately, we were already working on this mapping. He was really interested in the map. So we kind of worked as much as possible with him. He's a very busy person, but to share that resource and kind of, I guess, another way to build that relationship with those different policymakers turned out to be, and with community too, was paper maps. So we are big fans of printing. So even though we're working with technology and the internet and all of these, having a printed map, and which really shows like, wow, we really have a lot of schools in Kibera and they really aren't getting attention. There's thousands of children being educated this way. That was just like so important. So knowing the right communication channel, I guess, and we were even able to bring that map up to, education ministry and so forth. Because it always is like having that visual on paper just turned out to be important. So we've done that throughout other projects too. But beyond that, it's like if you don't have that supportive person in your particular, you don't have the MP on your side, because he was able to take that map then up to Parliament and get more resources for Kibera schools. Like he could use that as, but he was also already interested in that. So if you don't have that key person, you have to figure out, well, who is your stakeholder? Or maybe that means, in our case, working with the there's a couple of different policy advocacy organizations that do research and try to advocate with the government about and kind of help them understand policy issues. But that's a very slow process. So we're kind of like more excited about like, can we get the map in people's hands? Can we build a relationship and figure out, oh, who's really into this issue? Yeah, but I feel like we're still learning also 10 years later about how to manage that process. I guess I would say it's if you're already like an advocacy organization, you'll have challenges bringing in technology because that's not your thing, and it's kind of like, that's the challenge for us, being more technology, familiar with technology, bringing in that kind of social impact advocacy angle and figuring out who those right people were was our challenge. So each group, I guess, depending on your background. So we tried to bring those two things together. But it's also very hard when you want to target a lot of different issues. So we didn't only want to target education. We couldn't become specialists, but we felt like we needed to learn a lot about each target issue to know who the players were.
Awesome.
So it's important to have those civil society partners who are already doing lobbying of the government, if you can find them, to partner with you. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Gust, you're living in Argentina, but you're helping an NGO in Kenya. So this sounds really interesting. And from my understanding, you're helping with the technical side. So could you explain to us how is it that it works? How is it that you're in an entirely different country contributing to this NGO in the other side of the world? How is the dynamic of working from there?
Yes, well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm working a fellowship with Engineering for Change. So they make all the contact for me to work with them. And about the work, I mean, right now in 2020, it's very easy to work remote with a lot of people. Like I'm here in Argentina and I'm working easily with persons of Africa. And I think this is part of the digital transformation that we're living right now. And most in the civic technology, it's very easy to collaborate and work with another organization. And also in Wingu, where I work, we have teams from all over Latin America, and we work a lot with people from North America, Europe, or another part of the world. So I think it's something very common in technology right now. And in the case of the things that we do to make this more dynamic and not to make hard the communication and that kind of things, we use different ways to channels of communication. We use the Slack mainly for the communication in there. When we are making a more formal communication, we use the emails. In a more technical way, we in this project we are using GitLab to make the application and commit the code and that kind of things. I don't know if you have another question about this.
Oh, that's awesome. And you were mentioning something very interesting. How can you work remotely with mostly anyone across the world? And we all know we're facing a very difficult challenge as humanity, the COVID-19 emergency. So I'm wondering if you guys, if your organizations, if your projects are being interrupted somehow or altered by this challenge, by the COVID-19 challenge. And if so, how are you reacting and how are you overcoming this COVID-19 situation that we're all facing?
Yes, well, our application is mainly targeted for daycares, and now with all of these social distancing measures, the daycares are not working right now in Kenya because they are in a semi-lockdown. And so this social enterprise, Playing Totos, is looking for different ways to transmit to the organization more better ways to keep the daycares more healthy and like to implement better measures for the next future. Like when the lockdown is over, those daycare will be able to work with all the measures that the government is making. But now the application is like not working exactly because those daycares are not working.
Awesome. Dan and Erica, are you facing some challenges? I assume you are. And how are you overcoming them in the COVID-19 emergency?
Okay, let me go first.
Yeah.
Actually, it's more of an opportunity for us because we used to do our check my school work offline, online, but more dominant on the offline side, so more on the community organizing. But because of the COVID-19 and all these requirements on social distancing, we were sort of forced to really go into online and virtual interactions. And the app that we developed provided us the opportunity to be still active and proactive in the advocacy, because it is through the app that we are able to collect information from the ground. But, and this is a big but, and because we are really focusing, or we want to focus on what we call the last mile schools. These are the schools that are in far-flung villages. And therefore, because it is the pandemic, many are still actually staying at home. And therefore, these are really homes in villages with no internet, and probably with no computer and smartphone. And so what do we do? And this is where we introduce what we call the information intermediaries, or the infomediaries. So these are the main users right now of our CMS app. And through them, we are able to collect information from people about their feedback. And we're also able to supply information for them coming from the internet.
Awesome. Thank you. Erica, would you like to share with us something with this?
Yeah, we kind of also took it as a challenge, since we do mapping, to create a resource for, so basically in Kibera, a lot of the organizations were unable to do their typical work. And a lot of them started to try to provide some kind of COVID response, even if that wasn't anything related to what they were doing. So people were handing out face masks and put together a lot of hand washing sites. As you can imagine, in informal settlements, that's a huge challenge, keeping any kind of disease at bay. So there was this strong fear that there could be a major outbreak. Social distancing is not really possible in a very crowded slum setting, but introducing hand wash sites and these masks and soap, and then also, just as things started to shut down, providing things like food and water and free. So we kind of were like, well, what can we do with our resources? We kind of, the team in Kenya actually did aid with distribution of some supplies, but in terms of maps, the virus. So we put together a site with using Ushahidi software, which is another Nairobi-based technology company that we know well, just to map out the instances of COVID, because the actual disease, we weren't finding a lot of maps showing where it was in Kenya. So now we have this site, which I can put a link in the chat to, COVID tracker for all of Kenya, which shows basically it started, we decided to just post the Ministry of Health updates, which come every day, but geolocated, because actually it's not really allowed to post any kind of suspected cases. It's really, we could easily be shut down. So we just took that official data, and it's gotten better over time. So it slowly became more disaggregated, and we were able to really map it more specifically, also posting recoveries and deaths. And then we also added a layer of the responses people were doing. So particularly in Kibera, but also throughout the country, anyone who's providing anything like those face masks, or just testing sites also, or different kinds of outreach. So we tried to capture the resources also. So it's pretty crowded map right now. We're trying to figure out how to, the next step, because there's been so many cases, but actually not nearly as many cases as the US. So they've done pretty well in that sense. But yeah, that was our kind of main thing. But our staff is no longer really able to come into the office unless they're really close by. But our news team has continued to operate. They kind of stopped for a little while to figure out how they could safely operate, but then felt like compelled to cover the crisis in Kibera and how people were experiencing it, which is also an economic crisis for them. So there's a lot of videos on YouTube. They've kind of used a long distance microphone. So, oh,
I think
following. Did we lose our moderator?
Well, Erica, as you mentioned that from the measure that you're taking in MapKibera, I just remember that in Wingu, we worked in a project called Caminos de la Villa, with it's very similar to what you do in MapKibera, but in the slums of Buenos Aires. And right now, we we developed like a new feature for map the metrics of the COVID-19 in those slums, because we were having a big problem in the slums of Buenos Aires because they couldn't implement social measure distance measures, and we like map all the problems that they currently have, or what are the hotspots of COVID in those slums, and like to make a clear data of what exactly are the problems in those slums, because it wasn't very visibilized by the government. So just for me to share that.
So kind of similar. That's cool.
Thank you.
I put the
My
link
apologies,
to
I
the...
have some problem with the connection.
I just put the link in the chat for the Kenya tracker. So you can click there. Primarily, most of it's in Nairobi. But I guess I think we all have an advantage when we have technology as our main tool. We can switch to this kind of online virtual mode of operating a little more easily than maybe other types of companies and organizations. But it's still hard. Like, we had mapping planned that was field mapping, and we're trying to figure out if there's a safe way to do this field mapping. Because, well, certainly not if there's any travel involved, but even locally, I mean, people are leaving their houses, but how do we make sure that our team is really safe and promoting safety? So even on our videos, do we have people always covered in a mask, even if they're talking to the camera? We've had to confront some of these things, and we've had to do proposals that, you do remote mapping instead of field mapping, although we prefer like field mapping really. So yeah, certainly challenge.
Awesome.
Oh, I wanted to mention, can I mention one thing?
Yeah.
For those who want to learn about Openstreetmap, which is a tool we used, and there is a conference this weekend, State of the Map 2020, a virtual and free conference. I'll put the link here, which is the big global Openstreetmap conference that's annual. It was supposed to be in Cape Town this year, but it is accessible to anyone. And if you want to learn about anything going on in Openstreetmap, or find out how to learn how to do it yourself, it's definitely something that anyone can do that has any kind of computer access. So you can find out how to map your own community there at the conference.
Awesome. We have a couple of questions from the audience here, which we might pose it before closing. Jessica is asking us, have you thought of creating a social enterprise or to develop a business model to run your organization?
Which one was that for?
Jessica.
Was that for
She's
all
asking
of us?
if, have you, yeah, it's general if any of you want to jump in.
Okay, let me quickly respond to that. We actually tried. And we started with the concept of the social impact bond, or the SIB, the outcome-based financing. And we did not, advance from the conceptualization to the actual thing. We talked with some companies, private companies here in the Philippines, and explored the idea with them. but there seems to be some aversion to social accountability. I mean, to the social accountability framing of what we do, because we come up with monitoring findings which may be, which may be against, the government, and so some private sector groups are really careful and cautious about getting involved in the kind of work that we do. So, that is one challenge that we encountered. The monitoring aspect of what we do is also difficult to measure in a way, and that makes it difficult for us to come up with, how it can be measured in terms of profit, because even if it is a social enterprise, it should be concerned with that, and that somehow is an area where we have great difficulty.
We've also looked into
Yeah.
very many different kinds of financing, and certainly there are aspects that could be considered social entrepreneurship. I guess that would be, we do mapping under contracts with usually NGOs also that need maps for different things. So in doing that, we get to create the open data around the topic, and also not have to rely entirely on grant funding. Of course, those are also charitable organizations themselves. They're just have a lot more money. So it's not necessarily outside in the purely commercial realm. But we've definitely worked out, like Don, we've worked out some kind of business plans, and we had some pretty interesting kind of response from different business community members. So I'd say that we're still working on that. It's just going to be one of maybe many types of avenues that we pursue for sustainability purposes. There's also a lot of people more and more using Openstreetmap to build apps and things, location-based services, startups, things like that, and they need maybe to work in the slums. So we've been thinking about like delivery, like is there a way to do like motorbike delivery into slums, working with our data. But of course it's open data, so we have an added challenge. It's not like we're selling our data. We want people to be able to access the data as much as they can. So it's more about, there's other things that could be a commercial outcome, more like the kind of the knowledge of how to work with that data, or present it usefully. So there's been ideas. We're always open to new ones as well.
Awesome. Thank you. We're nearly closing. So I don't know if you guys want to share with us some last thoughts before, just to wrap up, before thanking the audience for being here.
Well, first of all, thanks to all the people that assist to our talk. I think the most important thing to reflection right now is that right now we're currently living into a crazy time. So it's always good to keep the communication in a team and always try to see what are the best way to communication for like keep the communication alive, and also socialize with another organization or NGOs in the world, because probably you're taking a problem and another organization in another part of the world already solved that. So you will always make like a network with other NGOs that are making the same as you. And as we are like in the social sector, it's very, we are working together to make, I don't know, a better world or something.
Yeah, let me build on that, because I guess my last message also is on connecting. As I said at the start, we are not a tech organization, but we've been trying to make use of tech for our own advocacy. And I would actually want to recognize the help that we got from William and Mary students. So they were our interns, and they had big contribution in the development of many of our tech innovations. And I guess that's really important. The bridging between advocacy groups and tech groups. And if we may add, if we can also be bridged with the entrepreneurial people or groups, then that would be, a really a powerhouse cast. I mean, the advocacy is necessary because it really creates the mission, The tech is necessary because it makes the work efficient, but we need financing as well. We need people who will invest in these ideas, and so those connecting and bridging are really crucial.
Yeah. I guess I would just close by saying that, you know, if you want to get involved and do kind of any kind of the stuff that I was talking about in your organization, please reach out. I don't know if there's a way through this platform, or maybe Evaristo can explain how to contact any of us. But in Latin America, I know I've always admired that there is a kind of strong civil society in most of the countries have such a tradition of really standing up and speaking out about things against the government if they don't believe in something. So, you know, while in Kenya, we've had to be more cautious because it's not quite as readily accepted as a normal thing to kind of stand up and protest, but you can create data and do that, then all the better. And then, you know, you can maybe make change without having to always to be quite as cautious as we do. Although I don't know if you all feel that way, that it's safe, but, you know, having visualizations of data and like really impactful messaging is super important. So, you know, focus on the communication as well. Like, how are you communicating your message? Not just, you know, how are you collecting the information and how are you doing all of that, but what's the best way to really have that messaging impact. But yeah, please reach out if you're curious to learn more about, and I guess for any of us, I don't know how they can connect with us, but.
Awesome. Feel free to share your emails on the chat if you're comfortable.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time. We tremendously appreciate you guys sharing all your experiences with us. From what I see, the audience was very happy for having you here. I'm going to switch to Spanish for a minute. Para las personas que nos comentan sobre el traductor, esta charla será subida en internet con subtítulos y con la traducción en subtítulos. Hacerlo en tiempo real fue un poco complicado, pero la subiremos a internet con subtítulos en español para que la puedan ver sin ningún problema. All right, so thank you very much again. We're thrilled to have you here. We hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Feel free to jump in any other session. And, well, goodbye. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Gracias.
For moderating.